The people who are genuinely prepared are not buying expensive gear. They are quietly putting a handful of items into the cart, the kind you have walked past 100 times at the store, most of them costing just a few dollars. And let me be honest, these are not comfort products. Each one closes a specific, documented gap that only becomes visible after the power has been out for 3 days and the shelves have emptied. The item in the number 1 spot costs only a few dollars, and it quietly supports something a long emergency tends to wear down over time. 12 items, all of them worth having in your kitchen before August is over. This video is independent research, and the goal is to inform, not to alarm. Nothing here is medical, emergency, or professional advice for anything involving injury, illness, or medication. Follow official guidance and qualified professionals. Let's begin. 12 Honey. In the sealed tombs of ancient Egypt, archaeologists have reportedly found jars of honey that sat undisturbed for more than 3,000 years, and when opened, the honey was still edible. That is not a myth. It is a widely reported archaeological finding, and it means that the jar of honey in your kitchen runs on the same principle. Why? Because honey is one of the lowest moisture, highest acidity foods known in nature, a chemical environment where bacteria and mold simply cannot survive. You do not have to add a single preservative. Honey is its own preservative. Now picture a scenario. It is day 3, without power, the refrigerator is dead, the kitchen has lost anything fresh, your sugar is running low, and the kids want something sweet, but there is almost nothing left. Honey gives you both a sweetener and a dense energy source in a single jar. 1 tablespoon carries roughly 64 calories of glucose and fructose sugars. The body converts to usable energy almost immediately, with very little digestive effort. In a tired, hungry, stressed body, that matters. Blood sugar comes back up, and a little of that mental clarity returns for the moments when clear decisions count. One important safety note that belongs in every conversation about honey: never give honey to a child under 1 year old. Infants cannot yet handle a bacterium that honey can rarely contain, and this is a firm rule from pediatric health authorities. For everyone above that age, honey is a staple. There is also a misunderstanding that trips a lot of people up. When honey crystallizes and turns cloudy, it gets thrown out because it looks spoiled. That is a mistake. Crystallization is a natural process, not spoilage. Set the jar in a warm water bath for a few minutes, and it returns to a fully liquid state with no loss of nutritional value. Storage is simple, sealed tight, somewhere cool and dark, out of direct sunlight. A large jar at a warehouse store runs about $10 to $15, and it lasts effectively forever. The archaeological evidence already proved that over a span of thousands of years. The cheapest, longest-lasting item on the whole list is right here. But honey alone is not enough, because without the next item, everything you store can quietly go bad over the long run. And that next item is the one most people think about least on the shelf, and it makes the biggest difference. Item 11: Pickling. Canning salt. 2 bags of salt sit side by side on the shelf. The price difference is almost nothing. Most people automatically grab regular table salt without a second thought. For everyday cooking, that is completely fine. But when it comes to long-term food preservation, that automatic choice can quietly ruin everything, and by the time you notice, it is usually already too late. Table salt carries 2 additives: iodine and anti-caking agents. Both are harmless, even beneficial in normal cooking. The iodine is deliberately added as a public health measure to prevent iodine deficiency. But in fermentation and brining, both create specific problems that undermine the process. Iodine reacts chemically with vegetables during fermentation and causes discoloration, turning pickles an unappetizing gray-brown. The anti-caking agents cloud the brine, and that is not just a cosmetic issue. Cloudy brine can be a sign that the biological process, making the food safe without refrigeration, the fermentation itself, has gone wrong. Pickling salt is pure sodium chloride, no iodine, no additives. That is exactly why food preservation guides, including the USDA's, specifically call for canning or pickling salt, rather than general-purpose table salt. Beyond food, pure salt has a couple of extra uses worth knowing. Mixed with clean water in the right proportion, it makes a simple saline solution, the kind traditionally used to rinse a minor scrape and gentler than plain tap water. And rubbed in a thick layer over fresh meat, salt pulls surface moisture out and slows spoilage, which is the whole reason salt curing has been used for thousands of years. That said, safe curing depends on correct methods and conditions, so treat it as history worth knowing rather than a step-by-step to improvise in a crisis. Salt does not spoil. A chemist could not tell today's salt from salt made thousands of years ago. Its molecular structure does not change. The one thing to know, without an anti-caking agent, it can draw moisture and harden, but it loses none of its effectiveness. Stored in an airtight glass jar, it lasts indefinitely. One more detail most people miss. When you make a true salt brine, using non-chlorinated water matters, because chlorine residue can kill the helpful bacteria that start the fermentation, which is why some experienced households let their water sit out overnight so the chlorine can dissipate. A bag of pickling salt is a few dollars, and it is the quiet item that guarantees the reliability of every other food you store correctly. So on the protein side, which item gets overlooked the most? That is next. Item 10. Peanut butter. Now we come to what might be the most ordinary looking item on the list, but the ordinariness is a little deceptive. The thing most overlooked in an emergency is protein. Rice, pasta, crackers, canned corn, for most people these are the backbone of the stockpile, and none of them provide meaningful protein. Fresh milk spoils within the first 12 hours of an outage. When the last carton is gone, the reality lands hard. The kids still need breakfast, older adults still need calcium and protein for muscle function, but everything on hand is filling without being nourishing, and those are two very different things. When the body goes without enough protein for a while, the effects are not subtle. Muscle strength drops, recovery slows. For an adult carrying water, clearing debris, or caring for someone under physical stress, that decline can matter over time, and it tends to creep up before people notice it. That is exactly why experienced preppers quietly drop a jar of peanut butter into the cart, not because they plan to eat it that afternoon, but because it closes a nutritional gap most people do not even notice they're inside of. 2 tablespoons of peanut butter carry about 190 calories, 8 grams of protein, and 16 grams of fat. No cooking, no refrigeration. You can eat it straight from the jar with a spoon. Stir it into oatmeal, add it to soup for extra calories and body, combine it with honey for a zero-cook, high-energy food. Thinned with a little water, it even works as a sauce base. It does not feel like a restaurant meal, but it is genuinely nourishing, in a way pasta alone never is. An unopened jar keeps for up to 2 years. A large jar at a warehouse store runs about $10 to $12, roughly a month of use for a family of 4. The 3 things that matter most in crisis nutrition are calorie density, protein, and fat, and peanut butter delivers all 3 in one jar. In the natural versions, just peanuts and salt, oil separation at the top is normal. Stir it back in and keep storing. The one thing to watch is keeping moisture out of the jar, so always use a dry spoon. But protein alone is not enough, because the body cannot fully use even protein without calcium and the right vitamins, which is exactly why the next item is on the list. Item 9. Non-fat dry milk. There is a gap peanut butter cannot fill. The combination of calcium and complete protein in a drinkable form, the kind children and older adults especially need. Non-fat dry milk steps right in here. 1 serving provides about 8 grams of complete protein, plus calcium, vitamin D, and B vitamins, the product you normally ignore on the shelf, but that turns out to be quite valuable in a crisis. Stir it into oatmeal, add it to soup for extra calories and body, combine it with peanut butter and honey, and you have built a zero-cook, high-energy meal. The critical detail to know: choose the version labeled non-fat, not whole milk powder. The fat in whole milk powder oxidizes over time and can develop off flavors, turning undrinkable fairly quickly. Removing the fat extends shelf life dramatically because there is no longer a component left to oxidize. Once opened, transfer the remaining powder to an airtight container and use only a dry spoon. Moisture is the single real cause of early spoilage. Sold for a few dollars at most stores, this product quietly closes a gap that most people never put on their stockpile list. It cannot turn a crisis into a restaurant experience, unfortunately, but it does make it genuinely nourishing in a way rice and pasta never can. Stored correctly, it holds its quality for years. Item 8 electrolyte powder packets. This scenario plays out every summer, and the symptoms often go unnoticed until they are well advanced. A man in his late 40s spends an afternoon securing his property against an incoming storm. He is hauling equipment, reinforcing doors, moving constantly in 90-degree heat. He is sweating heavily and drinking water the whole time, thinking he is doing the right thing. By evening, his head is pounding, his legs are cramping, and despite everything he has drunk, he is getting steadily weaker. He is confused, because in his mind he drank plenty of water. What he may be running into has a name: dilutional hyponatremia. Heavy, prolonged sweating can lower the sodium in the blood. When you keep drinking only water without replacing electrolytes, you can dilute the sodium that is left. Past a certain point, water alone may not be enough, and taking on very large amounts of plain water without any electrolytes can carry its own risk. This is a mechanism most people have never heard of, and severe symptoms, worsening confusion, persistent cramping, vomiting, are a signal to seek medical help, not to keep drinking. The World Health Organization established that the small intestine absorbs water far more efficiently when sodium and glucose are present at the same time. Without that combination, the body's capacity to move fluid into the bloodstream slows significantly, no matter how much water you drink, because the issue is not the volume of water, but the absorption mechanism itself. Electrolyte powder packets work with the sodium-glucose co-transport system in the gut wall and can help the body take on fluid more effectively than water alone. In field conditions, that difference can be what keeps someone on their feet through a long, hot day. There is one more dimension worth mentioning. After several days in a row of dry, stored food, a flavored powder gives both adults and children a real reason to keep drinking. Dehydration builds quietly. In children, they do not reliably report being thirsty, and by the time visible symptoms appear, the gap is already meaningful. Stored in its original box, in a sealed container with a moisture-blocking lid, shelf life runs 2 to 3 years. In the sports nutrition aisle, it is 25 to 50 cents a packet, a full week's supply for a family for less than the price of a cup of coffee. Items even oral rehydration salts. If electrolyte powder handles thirst from heat and physical effort, this item addresses something more serious: dehydration from illness. The World Health Organization's oral rehydration salts protocol holds a special place in the history of public health. The Lancet has called oral rehydration therapy potentially the most important medical advance of the docked process. 20th century, and it is credited with saving tens of millions of lives across natural disasters, refugee crises, and disease outbreaks. That is not a marketing claim. It is a documented record built over decades in the world's harshest conditions. Why it works comes down to precision. One packet, dissolved in exactly 1 liter of clean water, recreates the ratio of sodium, potassium, chloride, and glucose that the WHO determined to be optimal for treating serious dehydration. At those specific concentrations, the sodium-glucose transport mechanism in the gut wall can keep working, even when the intestine is irritated or compromised, which is why it can help in conditions where plain water or an improvised drink often would not. When municipal water pressure drops or backup sources are used without full treatment, the risk of bacterial contamination becomes real and fast. Here is the accurate picture because it matters. After a disaster, most deaths are caused by the initial trauma of the event itself, not by disease. But waterborne and diarrheal illness is a serious secondary risk once water and sanitation are disrupted, especially in crowded conditions, and especially for young children and older adults. A water-related illness can move from a manageable situation to a serious one within a few days in those most vulnerable groups, which is exactly why having oral rehydration salts on hand is a reasonable, low-cost precaution. For severe illness, it is a supportive measure, not a substitute for medical care. A packet costs less than $1 and stores in its foil wrapper without much shelf life worry. It needs only clean water and something to stir with. A rehydration formula, used in clinics around the world for less than the cost of a piece of candy, earns a place in any preparedness kit. Now, to a subject just as basic as thirst, but talked about far less long-term energy. Item 6. Rice and dried legumes. Now to the more classic-looking item on the list, one that still makes a big difference even when it is stored wrong: rice and dried legumes. White rice, in the right conditions, oxygen-free, in airtight containers, somewhere cool and dark, can last effectively indefinitely. Dry beans, lentils, and chickpeas can reach a shelf life of 10 to 30 years, again under proper storage. The critical detail here: the original store packaging does not provide those conditions. A plastic bag or cardboard box is open to moisture and pests, and most people never question it while it sits in a pantry for years. The practical practical fix, store it in 5-gallon food-grade buckets with oxygen absorber packets or vacuum seal it. That one extra step turns a shelf life of 1 to 2 years into decades, and it costs just a few dollars for a bucket and packets. Nutritionally, rice and legumes complete each other. Rice provides energy, legumes provide protein and fiber, and together they form a complete amino acid profile that neither can provide alone. It is the nutritional equation many traditional cuisines have solved, without thinking, for centuries. Rice and beans in Mexico, rice and lentils in India. A large sack of rice runs about $10 to $15 and feeds a family of 4 for weeks. On cost, the price per kilogram of protein is nearly 10 times cheaper than fresh meat, a rare intersection of budget and preparedness. But remember that even a food that lasts this long is not safe without proper storage. Item 5. Oats. Oats might be the most versatile item on the list. On the nutrition side, they are a source of complex carbohydrates and fiber that release energy slowly. Unlike rice, they keep you full longer and raise blood sugar more gradually, which helps prevent the energy crash in a long day. Mixed with dry milk and honey, they make a meal that feels like a warm breakfast and needs zero sophisticated equipment. But there is a lesser-known use as well. Colloidal oatmeal finely ground oats has long been used and recognized for soothing skin irritation. Mixed with water and held against irritated skin in a cloth, its natural oils and compounds can have a calming effect, an approach dermatologists also recognize for easing mild eczema and sunburn discomfort, and a reasonable comfort measure when nothing else is on hand. Vacuum-sealed oats can last 10 to 20 years in proper storage. A large box runs a few dollars, and it is one of those rare products that earns a place on both the kitchen and the first aid shelf, one item doing 2 entirely different jobs at once. And what about one of the oldest ways to keep food itself from spoiling without a refrigerator? That is next in line. Item 4. White vinegar. White vinegar is a quietly multi-purpose item that sits unnoticed on the shelf. On the food preservation side, it provides the acid base for pickling and brining. A high-acid environment blocks bacterial growth, which is why, used together with pickling salt, it enables safe, no-refrigeration preservation. A jar of vegetables can keep safely for weeks with just 2 ingredients that cost a few dollars. But vinegar's second life is in cleaning. Its 5% acetic acid content can cut through grime and help with everyday surface cleaning, which is a real backup when the cleaning products aisle empties out in a crisis. It is also handy for rinsing produce to reduce surface residue when tap water alone feels inadequate. For any actual disinfection where it matters, sick rooms, contaminated surfaces rely on products and guidance meant for the job, rather than treating vinegar as a hospital-grade disinfectant. Vinegar lasts effectively forever. Its acidity is its own preservative. It never truly spoils, and the taste may only shift slightly over time. Stored in its sealed original bottle, it stays fine for years. A large bottle runs $3 to $5, one of those rare products pulling double duty in both the kitchen and the cleaning cabinet. Item 3. Baking soda. Baking soda might be the most does-everything item on the list, and that is not an exaggeration. It is known as a leavening agent in the kitchen, but its real value in a crisis is much broader, mostly on the cleaning and safety side. On cleaning, baking soda works as a mild abrasive for scrubbing surfaces when chemical cleaners run out, and it neutralizes odors, which makes a small but real difference for hygiene when the refrigerator is off or waste management gets harder. It also has a genuine, documented use in the kitchen. For a small stovetop grease fire, you never use water. Water makes a grease fire worse, and smothering the flame is what works. Turning off the heat and covering the pan with a metal lid is the primary move. A generous amount of baking soda can help knock down a very small flare-up. For anything beyond a tiny flame, get out and call emergency services, and a proper Class B kitchen extinguisher is the tool actually meant for this. Baking soda lasts effectively indefinitely stored in an airtight container. It clumps when it draws moisture, but keeps its effectiveness. A box costs a few dollars and earns its place across several everyday and emergency uses at once. You will see baking soda promoted online for internal remedies too, swallowing it for heartburn, and so on, but that is genuinely risky and belongs with a doctor or pharmacist, not a Stockpile video, so I am leaving those uses off this list on purpose. Item 2. Canned fish. Canned fish, especially sardines and salmon, is the piece that completes the protein side of the list. Peanut butter and dry milk cover daily protein needs, while canned fish adds omega-3 fatty acids, the fatty acids that matter for brain function and managing inflammation over stretches of prolonged stress, but that are missing from most stockpile lists because people think of canned goods as meat and forget fish. Sardines are especially good here because they are a small, short-lived fish, which keeps the risk of mercury buildup far lower than in large predatory fish. Since mercury accumulates as you move up the food chain, and sardines sit at the bottom of it, eaten with the bones, they also provide a meaningful amount of calcium, complementing what dry milk supplies. Canned fish keeps for 3 to 5 years in proper storage, cool, dry, and off a bare concrete floor because moisture rusts the bottom of the can. A tin of sardines runs $1 to $2, one of the cheapest protein sources on the list, and single-handedly, it closes the omega-3 gap that most stockpiles leave open. Item 1. Vitamin C. Multivitamin. And now to the very top of the list, the item most people never think about, but that is the most critical over the long run. In a short crisis, no one dies of a vitamin deficiency, but in a drawn-out one, as days turn into weeks, a limited food variety, canned, dry, grain-heavy, quietly starts to create a nutritional gap, and that gap can grow unnoticed for weeks. Vitamin C has a special importance here because the body cannot store it. It has to be taken in fresh every day. And when access to fresh fruit and vegetables is cut off, it is one of the fastest depleting nutrients. Historically, the scurvy that sailors suffered on long voyages without fresh food came from exactly this gap. Bleeding gums, slow wound healing, a weakened immune system, a disease that killed thousands over months-long journeys. A modern crisis is not expected to last that long, but even in a 2 to 3 week disruption, a shortage of vitamin C and other micronutrients weakens the immune system right when the risk of illness is highest, when sanitation is degraded, in exactly the window where the waterborne illness risk we covered in Item 7 is already elevated. A cheap bottle of multivitamins lasts for years. It largely holds its potency through the printed expiration date, and it completes the real purpose behind everything else you store in your kitchen, keeping your body functional. One more detail. If you are planning a dry food-heavy stockpile, freeze-dried fruit powders, especially orange or cranberry-based, are also rich in vitamin C and have a very long shelf life, a small addition for variety. A large bottle of multivitamins runs $5 to $10, the most ordinary item on the list and the longest range protector on it. Closing. Let me be clear about what this list is. Not a panic list, not a spend everything you have list, not a prediction that things are about to collapse. It is 12 items that close specific, documented gaps that appear when ordinary life becomes temporarily unreliable. The kind that happens regularly after storms, in prolonged heat, when the power stays out longer than expected, when a medical situation comes up far from help. Not rare events, ordinary days that happen to ordinary people across the country every summer. Honey provides energy without ever spoiling. Pickling salt gets food preservation right. Peanut butter and dry milk close the protein gap. Electrolyte and oral rehydration salts address dehydration, a serious risk once water and sanitation are disrupted. Rice and legumes offer a complete amino acid profile. Oats do double duty as breakfast and skincare. Vinegar handles both preservation and cleaning. Baking soda covers several everyday and safety situations at once. Canned fish closes the forgotten omega-3 gap. And vitamin C fills the gap everyone overlooks, but that matters most over the long run. None of this is expensive. The people who are genuinely prepared do not have more money than everyone else. They just made different decisions about 12 ordinary items on an ordinary store shelf before August was over. Which one goes in your cart first? Tell me in the comments. A like and a subscribe genuinely helps.